been chased by drug traffickers. He's been invited to dinner by the chief of a clan of headhunters. He's been to places where no white man has ever been. He's proud to have extended the boundaries of science. Snowdrop was a code name for a man called Henry X, or Dr. Henry, Henry Azadadale, Armen Victorian, Mr. Jones of the MOD.
If he's trying to hide something, he's hiding it very well. If he's keeping himself to himself, he does that well too. Some people prefer to be anonymous. They don't like to be a face. They don't like to be up front. I've spoken to him on the phone. He's always been very pleasant, very polite, very courteous. He likes to keep himself to himself. He may not even exist.
Do I think he's a spy? I thought that he could have probably been Russian.
I always figured that here was a guy who at one time had some great responsibility.
He was probably born in a cave, you know, yet was educated in New York.
He always had up-to-date equipment. That was the other thing, wasn't it?
His sort of whole presence sort of intimidated me in a way.
Why he should suddenly, you know, introduce himself to the UFO community in our neck of the woods, I have no idea.
Is what he's saying true? Or is he just a little man with trying to make a big story or being important?
What did Armen tell you that he did for a living? Who did he say he was when he contacted you?
He was Armen Victorian, wasn't he?
Doctor
Armen Victorian.
He was a researcher.
Researcher, yeah.
He offered help, actually, in the campaign. We do have certain characters who come, and you have to be a little bit careful about them. Just before he went, I sort of said to him, Armen, how do we know you're not a spy? So he just said, you don't. And he wouldn't enlarge on that. The thing is about Armen that if he didn't want to say anything, he would not. He couldn't be coaxed at all. Made up his mind. He would only give so much information about something, which was quite intriguing, actually, wasn't it? Frustrating, too.
If Lindis or I had tried to phone up the Secretary of the US Air Force, or dream on, I mean, we wouldn't have even got the telephone number. And yet he apparently could get straight through and get a response, which I suppose kind of impressed us. But we shared the documents with him that we did get out of men with.
We did. We got a whole lot of documents out through rubbish bags. Very interesting documents. But also there was another document, which was very interesting. It was all about the new role of Molesworth, American base. And I gave Armen a copy of it. And it was on the tube. And it was very covert and sort of opened up his coded case and put it in here, looking around, see if anybody's watching and it's crowded too. And we were so honest, you see.
It was chalk and cheese, really, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
He was obviously interested in how we'd got it, wasn't he?
Oh, he was, yes.
And that kind of, when we told him, I think he was quite surprised that we were, quite happy to tell him. That's when he lost interest.
Yeah,
really,
because I remember he saying, because we looked at each other, didn't we? He said something like, "What, you got it out, Lindis?"
And then we thought, well, was he actually trying to track down this huge sort of covert group of people?
The moles,
and actually, it's only us,
Yeah.
There's some of the work that you do with this, intelligence link or whatever.
He was sold to me as some sort of mysterious entity that was able to get information out of people and demonstrate some expertise in this. He was always described as somewhat shadowy, so suddenly became, to me, very intriguing. My research basically uncovered this, it was like a box that you open, and inside you see this woolly myth that is tinged with fact, but you don't quite know which parts are fact and which parts are fiction.
He said that he was a professor, Henry Azadadel, and that he worked at Nottingham University. He knew that we were interested in a UFO sighting case that had probably been a UFO crash landing, and he emphasised over the telephone that he was a specialist in what's known as crash retrieval cases. He arranged to come up on a Sunday and look at some information that we got to see if anything alien or whatever had actually crashed in 1985 in Cornwall. He knew that I'd been in the services, and he knew which ships had served on, and when and where I'd served in the forces. And that made me a little bit sort of careful, really, a little bit aware of possibly being a threat in some way. When he left, I noticed that some of the documents that I'd left out were actually missing. Well, I was very, very diplomatic over the phone. I said that he may have picked them up by mistake and could I have them back? And he said that no, I couldn't have them back. That if I wanted them back, I would have to pay the postage and a large fee, which I couldn't afford. But it was over £2,000. I reported him to the police and nothing happened, nothing at all. Reported him to the Ministry of Defence and nothing happened at all.
I and another writer were commissioned by the Independent magazine to write an article and investigate who was making the crop circles in the north half of Wiltshire. The day after this was published, I received a rather odd phone call from a man whom I immediately recognised. I recognised the voice immediately, but who was portraying himself as somebody else. He told me his name was Cassava Ntumba, a Kenyan journalist. He started to imply that I was a member of the intelligence services.
Is it something which is paid?
Is what something?
There's some of the work that you do with this intelligence link or whatever.
Well, I didn't say there was an intelligence link. Yes, of course.
How does 72 hours suit you?
72 hours.
Yes, for a cover blow.
In what respect? 72 hours to blow my cover?
Yeah, to tell you exactly what you are. Because I usually do this sort of work for good money.
Good. Well, go for it.
I usually do that for very good money.
Go for it.
And we usually win.
The whole object of the exercise is that you were going to say what he wanted you to say. And even if you didn't say it, he either said it for you or became convinced that you had said it. So it became a sort of a redundant exercise, really. So you just went along with it. Myself and my co-writer, Jim Schnabel, decided to look more closely at who he was. And I think I became particularly interested when I found out that he was, in fact, a notorious orchid smuggler.
Finally, a court has heard how a man made a fortune plundering beauty spots around the world for rare wild orchids. At the Old Bailey, Henry Azadadel admitted 4 charges of smuggling and dealing in protected plant species. The prosecution said Azadadel had raped the world of some of its most precious assets.
Ironically, Henry Azadadel, despite the conviction, has made a real contribution to this arcane field. Paphiopedilum henryanum was his discovery in remotest China.
I found out a lot of things about him, but I don't know how many of these things are true. So his myth is that he went from Armenia to Iran. He worked at some point in Tehran in the South Korean embassy as a diplomatic fixer. With the fall of the Shah, he came to Britain with his brother Basil. I found out, for instance, that he at some point sold life insurance. He told the appeal court at his orchid trial that he worked in a mini-mart selling crisps and cans of pop. I can't imagine that, but in some way I can. It would just be the funniest thing.
All I knew was that he owned at least one supermarket in Nottingham, which I never visited. Philip, my colleague at the time, went there, saw the supermarket, went to his house, saw his extensive collection of orchids and tribal artefacts.
I first became aware of a gentleman known as Armen Victorian about 20 years ago. He was introduced to me by a colleague in the UFO field, and it was only some time later that I began to learn more about his alleged background, working in intelligence for the exiled Shah of Iran, for example.
Did Armen explicitly say that he had a background in intelligence to you?
Yes.
I'm perfectly prepared to believe that he was some sort of diplomatic fixer in Iran. I don't believe that he would have been working for any British intelligence service, but again, who knows? When I was researching my work on Henry, I disbelieved the likelihood of that far more than I am inclined to now. I've now become interested in the possibility that the state would become interested in paranormal style phenomena. Not so much because they're looking to find out the causal agent. They should be interested in the effect it has on people, on our culture. In that sense, you know, I could turn it around and say, well, Henry was perfect. Henry would be the perfect agent for them, you know. I don't personally believe it.
He used to get called out if there was something particularly alienish about about this.
So he implied that he possibly had contacts with the military or the government and was working for them.
That seemed to be it, rather than just a sort of group of people who were sort of into UFO watching or something.
He was all in black. He had a black jumper on, black trousers, black shoes that looked new, and his hair was sort of black and greying, and he got like a sort of 5-6 day growth of beard. Historically, over the years, there have been stories about men in black, and people are turning up to investigate witnesses to cases claiming to be from the military, the secret services and other organisations. And here I was not believing in that particular concept, and yet it was standing right in front of me.
We would quite literally spend hours on the phone.
The telephone calls could range from any time from, say, 7:30 p.m. in the evening, and he would then ring again at 2:30 in the morning. I said, well, you know, what are you doing ringing at this time in the morning? He said, well, I spend all my time doing this. He said, this is very, very important work, and we shouldn't forget that.
Oh, God, don't let it be Armen, you know, because there goes match of the day.
When the phone rings like this, and suddenly you find yourself in this situation, you don't really want to call it to a halt too quickly, because there's somehow some fun about it. I said to him...
You are Henry Azedaedle?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Dr. Victorian?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you sound incredibly like him.
Have you spoken to that person?
I've listened to all the taped phone calls that are similar to this one.
Taped phone calls? With who?
Well, with various people connected with crop circles.
That is interesting. I would like to speak to that person. But, you know, it seems to me a mysterious character.
He's the Mr. Big of crop circle intelligence. He goes by many names.
That's a silly thing to do, isn't it? I've heard about this man. What do you make of him?
I think he's an idiot.
Where does, I mean, has he done anything right?
I saw no reason to doubt the man, but being in our kind of field of work, if you like, in research, it's always best when you've got something of substance, you know, that we can look at. Quite out of the blue, he dropped this bombshell. Well, would you like to see some secret UFO documents? We eventually did meet. He, I suspect, thought that I wasn't entirely convinced, as it were. And we arranged to meet just off the M1 near Nottingham. And there he was, and he produced this folder with a load of classified documents with the top secret logo, if you like, impressioned in red ink. I think this was just his way of saying only somebody with my intelligence background could acquire this kind of documentation. It all added to the intrigue and the mystery of the guy, but it seemed to me to be a mystery that he was quite happy to see flourish.
I initially read somewhere that Henry was being persecuted by some government agency, acting in the guise of BT, that men were seen tampering with his junction box. He was experiencing break-ins to his home, bugs in his wall sockets. Moreover, he had been hit with extremely high telephone bills. He was due to appear in Nottingham Magistrates Court, charged with the non-payment of something in the region of £7,000 or £8,000 worth of phone bills under various names, I think under about 7 different pseudonyms. He had denied it. In fact, he had refused to speak to the police. On his arrest report, he gave his occupation as cleaner, which even there had higher connotations of sort of a hitman or a person that goes in after the person's been hit and cleans up. As it turned out, the case was discontinued. Henry will maintain, of course, that it was dropped, which isn't quite the same thing. He was not acquitted. His wife, on the other hand, admitted it immediately and received a suspended sentence. I certainly got some of my information on Henry through, surprisingly enough, the CIA, MI5 and the British police and the Crown Prosecution Service all conspired really to providing somebody like me with information that was going to harm Henry. Had it gone to Crown Court, it would have been brilliant because his defence was going to be that the powers that be in the US government were bearing their full weight on Henry. He troubled the US government enough to shake free some interesting documentation that may be relevant to ufology. He then would play the persecuted individual, that he was basically such a pain that they were somehow trying to shut him up, literally closing down his source of communications, presumably cutting off his telephone line.
He could have gone to the United States after the Ayatollah Khomeini, took power and made a good living out there, talking about his work and the like with the Shah of Iran. And this was an anathema to me. I just couldn't understand. Why not do that? Why instead, relocate to Nottingham and tie yourself up with a bunch of UFO enthusiasts? There was no logic to that to me.
I mean, there was a sense almost of unreality about some of the meetings, or some
bizarre.
parts of the meetings, weren't there?
Yeah, because often Annie and I, when he left, we just used to look at each other.
What?
Do you think he's all right? do you think he is a spy? Annie's much more discerning than I am.
Henry as a Daedal, or Armen Victorian, or Dr. X fits this classic traditional stereotype of the outsider, the man in black, the mythic, exotic figure that moves in and out of various studies of phenomena, ufology, crop circles. It's almost as if he has taken the garb on himself as well and wears the clothing of the man in black, and he operates as that, and he wants people to see him as that. So there's a real symbiosis between his portrayal of himself and our portrait of him, what we project onto him. Certainly, if ufology or crop circles or one of those cultures didn't have a Henry, they would certainly have to invent one. I think to a certain extent we have invented Henry, and we've done it in league with Henry himself.